In the wake of the president's decision to not go ahead with Keystone Pipeline, Canada now looking elsewhere to sell oil. I'm talking about Asia. Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper set to head to China, his second trip overseas next month. How exactly does Canada feel about the president's decision yesterday? Earlier, I spoke with with Joe Oliver, Canadian Minister of Natural Resources, and I asked him about his reaction to the president's decision.
Well, we were very disappointed, of course. We believe this project can create an enormous number of jobs in both our countries. It would contribute to national security in the United States and create billions of dollars in economic activity for both our countries. So we considered it a win-win and hoped that for those reasons it would be accepted.
TransCanada, of course, said they would reapply. The president invited the company to reapply for that permit. Clearly, though, it's going to take a while for any approvals to happen, maybe as much as a year after our election down here. You've been a big supporter of a pipeline that would go west, which would allow China to take advantage of your natural resources. How soon can that happen, and do you think it's likely that pipeline can be completed?
Well, I do think that we can't comment on that specific pipeline because it's under regulatory review, but it's a major strategic objective of our country to diversify our sources, our customer base, and the Asia market is very robust. It's growing and it's thirsty for energy. We export virtually all of our exports go to the United States. The U.S. is a great customer. We have the biggest trading relationship in the world, $1.6 billion every day. But you know, when you have one customer, there's a certain vulnerability. Also, international prices are higher, and we have enormous resources, which we need to find a market for. There's some 174 billion barrels of proven reserves in the world in Alberta. That's the third largest set of reserves in the world, and so we're looking to the Asian market. That is not inconsistent in any way with exporting oil to the United States.
Sir, I mean, it's always good to be buying oil from a friend and not from an enemy. I want to quote an open letter that you wrote recently, which I found, frankly, fascinating, and I'm wondering if what you're complaining about in this letter is the same thing we're finding down here in the U.S. You wrote, "Unfortunately, there are environmental and other radical groups whose goal is to stop any major project, no matter what the cost to Canadian families, in lost jobs and economic growth." Sir, I would say that we've got the same problem here. That we're both suffering from these radical groups that want to stop any kind of pursuit of oil exploration, oil generation between neighbors and friends. How do we get past that?
Well, you're right. And in fact, some of your radical groups are sending money to our radical groups, and with the express purpose of trying to game the regulatory system. I think what we have to do is get the message out to our citizens that these projects are really important in the national interest. They'll provide energy security. They'll create hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in economic growth. Billions of dollars for governments to support important social programs as well. So it's clearly in the national interest, and we're going to continue to advocate for the development of infrastructure to get our resources from where they are to where they're wanted.
Minister Oliver, thanks for coming on the show tonight. An absolute pleasure. You have to come back. We'd love to hear from you again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right, for more on the pipeline decision and what's in store for the future, I'm joined by Robert Bryce, Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow with the Center for Energy Policy and Environment. Robert, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here. All right, what'd you think about what the minister said? He's willing to do anything to sell that oil. He's going anywhere.
Well, of course. I mean, the Canadians aren't going to stand around and wait for the U.S. to act. They're going to look for markets. And as he pointed out, the resource base in Canada of over 170 billion barrels of oil resource, it's enormous. So they're going to go where the market is, and they clearly see a market in Asia. And if the U.S. isn't going to respond, it makes perfect business sense for them to go elsewhere.
Are you surprised by what the president decided on this?
No, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. I think a lot of people are disappointed. But it's not surprising in that if you have listened to Obama over the last few years, he's obstructed, he's even vilified the oil and gas sector at nearly every turn while providing billions of dollars in grants and loan guarantees for uneconomic energy projects in the wind sector, biofuels, electric cars. This is nothing new, unfortunately.
A string of misses. Let me ask you this. I think a lot of the objection to this pipeline is all about the Canadians building a pipeline in our country. But in fact, that's happened a lot. The first Canadian-American pipeline built in 1950. There are scores of pipelines all over this country, many crossing the Canadian-American border. This is just business as usual, isn't it?
Well, sure. And remember, this doesn't require any money from U.S. taxpayers. There's no governmental involvement here in terms of financial requirements, and yet it would create thousands of jobs. But let me, Jerry, I looked up the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. They just issued their report this week, remember?
Yeah.
And I wanted to read you just a couple of things from it. They said in there, in the energy section, we face a long-term decline in global production from existing conventional sources of fossil fuels, which will collide with the expected surge in demand from the rise of global middle-class growth. This is the President's own Council on Jobs and Competitiveness saying we need alternative sources of energy, and here's a big one. And yet he's blocking the pipeline.
He doesn't have a long record of listening to these special commissions. We appoint a lot of them. We don't necessarily take their advice, that's for sure. What is at stake for us, though, if we don't? I mean, clearly the president's invited TransCanada to come back and reapply. But if this doesn't happen, what are the stakes for the U.S.?
Well, it remains to be seen, Jerry. We have a situation where domestic oil production is rising and rising fairly rapidly thanks to the shale revolution. So it is possible, I have to say, that this oil might not be missed. But at the same time, we have an opportunity to bring in huge quantities of unfinished goods, crude oil, and finish them in American refineries and export them. I think that would be a great opportunity for the manufacturing base in the United States. But I think the other thing, Jerry, that's key here is that this pipeline, if it gets built, would provide 46% more energy to the U.S. economy than all the wind turbines and all the solar panels in the country. And yet all we hear from the president and the Green Left is, oh, renewables are the future. This one pipeline would be vastly bigger than all of the headline wind and solar projects that we're hearing about, and yet it's being blocked.
Fascinating number. Robert, thanks for coming on the show. Always great to see you.
Thanks a million, Jerry.
All right. Have a good afternoon. Coming up, President Obama